Well, in many respects, Beverly, this is still a very murky story. This all dates back to March last year when Solomon Islands media reported that weapons had been illegally smuggled into the capital, Honiara. Now, after a couple of days, the Solomon Islands police force issued a statement saying essentially that, yes, there was a consignment of crates that were unloaded at a private wharf in Honiara, and yes, they did contain weapons, but the police said they weren't real weapons. They were, in fact, gifts from the Chinese embassy that were fake. In other words, they were replica weapons, which the Chinese government had gifted to the Royal Solomon Islands Police Force for training purposes. Now, not long after that, about a week or so, the members of the RSIPF essentially paraded these weapons in front of the media, these allegedly fake weapons. They did some drills with them, and they sent those pictures out to all and sundry, basically saying, look, here's the evidence. Here are the weapons that were given. They're all fake. They can't shoot any bullets. There's nothing to worry about. Now, those assurances didn't calm everyone in Solomon Islands. Some members of the opposition were still deeply sceptical, and some members of civil society as well said that they were anxious about the fact that these weapons, or these replica weapons, so-called, were unloaded at the dead of night in a private port. And several members of the opposition have still been calling for more transparency, saying that, like doubting Thomas in the Bible, they needed to see these guns themselves to believe that they were, in fact, entirely fake. But that's where the story basically rested up until this recent story, which we saw last week, which has once again really broken it open and pushed the issue of this consignment right back into central stage in Solomon Islands national politics.
Now, Stephen, given what is now being claimed in these US cables, has either China or the Solomon Islands government made any further comment?
Well, the United States government hasn't publicly said much about this issue, but what's happened now that's really broken this open again is essentially a bunch of cables that US diplomats then in Port Moresby in PNG sent back around this time, around 18 months ago, back to Washington when this story was breaking. Now, these cables essentially said that the US didn't believe the account given by Solomon Islands. They cited an anonymous source. We don't know who it is, incidentally. The name or the identity of this source is redacted in the publicly released cable. But the United States government cites this source in this cable, saying essentially that they had seemingly seen these weapons and that according to the feel of them, according to the weight of them, according to their serial numbers, they looked to all intents and purposes and felt like real weapons. The US Embassy also said in this cable that it did not believe that the guns that were displayed a week or so later by the Royal Solomon Islands Police Force were the same weapons that were actually brought into the country a week or so earlier. So this cable, the release of this cable and the fact that it's been published by Al Jazeera has perhaps unsurprisingly caused a real political stir in Solomon Islands. So today you've got, for example, the opposition leader, Matthew Wale, calling for the RSIPF to come clean. You've got another prominent member of the opposition, Peter Kenaloria Jr., saying that there should be a commission of inquiry into it. And you've got also a furious denial from at least one senior civil servant in the Solomon Islands, Colin Beck, who's the head of the Foreign Affairs Ministry. He took to Twitter, or to X rather, over the weekend to say that the story was unfortunate, divisive, and that it wasn't true. But we haven't yet heard from Manasseh Sogavare, the Prime Minister, and perhaps most crucially, we have not yet had a statement from the Royal Solomon Islands Police Force in response to these cables, the allegations within it, all the calls that we've seen from the opposition.
Yeah, so the story is probably not over yet. The Solomons, though, have now asked Australia to continue their security presence in the country for the time being.
Yeah, this is an interesting but perhaps not entirely unexpected development. You might remember that when Australia first went into Honiara in late 2021 after the riots that shook the capital there, it was conceived as a short-term intervention. The Prime Minister at the time, Scott Morrison, said that he believed it would only be months. Everyone was very keen to dismiss any sort of comparison to the landmark Ramsay intervention, which Australia led in 2003, that saw Australia stay in Solomon Islands, or saw Australian forces stay in Solomon Islands for the best part of 20 years. Now, what's happened since then is, perhaps unsurprisingly, we've seen quite a bit of mission creep, and that's perhaps not coincidentally coincided with increasing Chinese security interest in Solomon Islands and the very contentious Solomon Islands-China Security Pact that was signed only 4 months or so after the riots that shook Honiara. So Australia has basically been making it clear over the last year or so to Solomon Islands that its forces are in no rush to leave, and Australian police and army personnel are happy to stick around for as long as they're needed. Now, initially last year, that was extended up until the Pacific Games that are going to happen in November this year. And then late last week, the government of Solomon Islands said that that's been extended again through to at least June next year in order to ensure that Australian forces are still on the ground to help provide security all the way up to and beyond the election that we're expecting in the first half of next year. So Australia's security presence in Solomon Islands is looking more and more like a semi-permanent one. Exactly how many people stay, though, and how long is yet to be seen.
Good to talk, Stephen. Thanks so much.
No problem. Thanks for having me, Beverly.